3x3 squares, huh, Brad?
I guess. I mean, according to you.
Look, you got to optimize your adjoining squares, adjoining tiles, and your road frontage. It's just simple math, really.
Are you the mayor?
I read this in Nintendo Power in like 1991, so I'm an expert, sir.
Did the populace of Dogtown place their faith in you at the ballot box?
I mean, look, if there were fair and honest elections, they sure as hell would have.
All right, this is getting too real for me. We're talking about the Super Nintendo version of SimCity. If anybody doesn't know, I was streaming a little bit of that the other night. Do you know that Will Wright had nothing to do with that game?
Yeah, that reads.
That version of SimCity was developed in Japan. It sure doesn't run especially well.
Well, that would have been before EA bought Maxis, right? So it's like...
I guess that's right, actually.
Probably Nintendo rolled up a dump truck load full of cash for the hottest PC franchises and was like, hey, we want to make a SimCity on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Oh, wow. Maxis wasn't acquired until 1997. Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about drawing graphics to screens from that era of video games, but you sure can see a lot of tiles being drawn to screens slowly as you scroll around your town.
There were a couple of times when I was kind of in and out last night while you were streaming that, but I noticed there were a couple of times where like you were hitting the CPU hard enough that entire swaths of the screen just didn't render.
Yeah, like it thinks. It's got load times. Like you when you're cycling through city layout or island layouts at the beginning of the game, like there's straight up load times or rendering time or something is happening. Like it's a cartridge game that
so the thing that struck me more than anything else about playing that, because I fired it up, it was one of the first things I fired up when I got the Mister, because I loved that game when I was a kid.
It's great.
And I was shocked at how hard it is to control with the gamepad. Like how slow everything feels. You know, you're not doing 400 APM there.
No.
Getting your city in shape.
Super Nintendo mouse support would have been appreciated, but they didn't think ahead.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
And joining us today is PC Gamer's own Wesley Fenlon.
Hello, I'm Wes. I didn't get in the trifecta there, but I'm Wes. Hey.
Was trying to think a way to work that in, but it didn't quite. Yeah, there's some sync issues here, you know.
It's you know, we're our brains are wired for light speed latency, and we get router latency here.
That's right, so we think at the speed of light, right?
Wes, how you doing, man? How's quarantine life treating you?
You know, I'm really psyched to be here because at this point, just any new human interaction that I haven't had in the past few days is super exciting. So yeah, it's, you know, the life's okay. I am keeping myself busy with stupid, unnecessary projects to improve things around the house, which is why I'm here today.
I was just about to say, I have to compliment you. I think you have one of the, since you're on a webcam here, you have one of the more well manicured rooms as a backdrop on a webcam.
Thank you. Yeah,
of most of the people that I webcam with these days.
What you can't see is the hole through the door where I nailed a slightly too long nail in for one of my pictures. Classic mistake there. Not going to mess that one up again, but got a nice hole in my door now.
I assumed you were going to say that like you had piled up all the stuff that's usually on the floor, so it's up out of in between you and the camera, so it's out of frame. But
heaps of laundry everywhere. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so you just have to very carefully stage manage what your webcam can see. Everything else is disposable.
So we're here today. You're here today because Brad and I like stupid, unnecessary projects.
Yes.
And we threw an offhand comment out a few weeks ago about, you know, we were doing something, but it's not as ridiculous as rolling your own router. And then you popped up in Twitter and we started talking and you were like, well, I just rolled my own router. And I went and read the article that you wrote about that experience on PC Gamer. Yeah. And I expected that to come with a lot of caveats. So I mean, I guess my first question is why, Wes?
Yeah. So my first answer is boredom. I was
All right,
bored,
I'm with you.
and I wanted something to do. But the longer answer is I upgraded to gigabit fiber like maybe 6 months ago. And at first it seemed pretty good. I was getting, I don't know, like 700 megs or so. And I was like, that's good enough. And then it just started to like, the problems just started to slowly add up and annoy me more and more. And the big one was, for some reason, whenever I or my roommate started doing like a big download from Steam or something, start downloading a game, not only were we not getting anywhere near the speeds that I knew Steam was able to put out, but it would actually like kill every other device on the network. And just like nothing could connect all of a sudden. And I didn't know if it was the AT&T modem, if it was something weird with my router, like what the hell was going on, if it was even like the wiring in the house. But after trying to troubleshoot that stuff, my best guess was my router, even though it was like a $250 Netgear, like pretty high-end router, I felt like the CPU in it was my bottleneck, or the memory or something in that router was just not up to handling the gigabit connection. And once we put too much data on it, it just crapped out basically.
So I had that exact same experience when I got AT&T fiber a couple of years ago. And you have to use the AT&T modem and you can do pass through and all that stuff. But I was using the AT&T router and passing through to one of the first gen of what became the Google Home router. So it's like one of those old TP-Link ones.
Okay, yeah.
That you can mesh. But I was seeing like 700, 800 megabits per second versus the 989 that I get when I just use the AT&T router, or when I got a more capable router. So yeah, I think that's like the fiber, I think, tends to show a lot of the weakness in your infrastructure.
I followed the exact same path when I got my fiber like 3 years ago. That's how I ended up with a pretty high end, like prosumer, almost enterprise level router. Is gigabit. Even if you have a router that can keep up with the throughput, it just tends to start exposing a lot of the edge cases that these consumer routers can't handle.
Yeah, so I guess I was like a little behind the curve of you guys, but I decided to do the more outlandish solution to it, which was take a computer that I had recently built and just turn it into a router, because I had it there. So
now you're talking. Let me ask you, before you got to that point, did you actually look into like what is out there at the consumer level these days for gigabit, and that's intended to handle like sort of more robust network conditions? Is there anything?
Yeah, so what I looked at, so I had another like more minor issue I was trying to solve, which was where I had my router placed was like in the garage where the connection came into the house, and then I had a secondary router upstairs in like the back half of the house to handle like the bedrooms, and switching between the two manually was kind of a pain to connect to. So I already kind of wanted to like switch to mesh or do something like that to make my Wi-Fi situation better, but I didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. So I was like, okay, how do I started looking at stuff like Ubiquiti makes this Amplify Alien that's like a really high end. I think it's a Wi-Fi 6 router. It can also support mesh stations if you want to add to it. But that thing was like $300 or $400, I think. And I was looking at like, wow, do I want to do like a Unify mesh system? And if I do that, what would be the actual router, sending data out to all that stuff? Do I want to buy what you have, Brad? And eventually I decided, well, I have the stuff here. It's probably not as efficient as spending like $200 or $300 on a mini PC, but I can spend $20 on a network card to add to this computer I already have and just roll with it. And then in the future, that opens me up to be able to like add my own access points and do like a mesh setup and kind of like roll my own way, instead of being stuck into like the Google Home setup or TP-Link or Netgear. Like I forget, there's a bunch of them out at this point.
Eero, yeah, there's a bazillion. I mean, the interesting thing about rolling your own with hardware you have is it also lets you try it for like very little startup cost.
Totally.
And if it sucks, then you can bail out pretty cheaply. And if it doesn't, then when you're ready to move on to something that's maybe more efficient or whatever, you can jump over to that.
Yeah.
What kind of specs are you running in that machine?
So I built a little computer in an Ncase M1, which is about I don't know, like the size of a big toaster, I guess, not even a toaster oven. And it has an old i5 6500. So that's about probably 4 years old at this point. So it's quad core. It's like 3.2 gigahertz. And compared to my old, the Netgear router had like a 1 gigahertz dual core CPU in it, which I would think would be enough to handle routing stuff. But I figured if I'm going to go overkill, like Operation Overkill, I might as well go with like a proper quad core CPU. I had this thing. It seemed like if I put this in there, at the very least, I would determine that the CPU was not the problem. Like worst case scenario, my problems persisted. And I go, okay, well, even a quad core 3.2 gigahertz isn't getting the job done. But thankfully, it has been getting the job done really well.
And just to be clear, like looking at what other people have done that have done similar projects on like the R Home Lab subreddit and some places like that, like it seems like you can buy a really inexpensive micro ATX board that has like a dual core Celeron built into it and probably be like and 4 gigs of RAM and be good to go. Like you don't need.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't need your i9 9900 with 32 gigs of RAM to make this thing work for a normal house.
Maybe if you're doing some 10 gig around your house or something like that, you might need something a little juicier. But yeah, for the most part, the mini PCs that people kind of will adapt for these if they're not building their own, seems like a lot of them are running around the 2 gigahertz like Celeron or Atom CPU dual core or quad core. And I think that's powerful enough.
Yeah, if you ever dig into the specs of what's in a consumer router and then you look at the type of stuff you're talking about, like you realize even those tiny little mini PCs are so much more powerful than what you're spending a pretty equivalent amount of money on in a consumer package.
Well, but I mean, the consumer router is running. I mean, they're not running modern ARM cores in the sense that like an Android or iPhone is running a modern ARM core now, but they're running like. The difference between the DDW, or sorry, the 54G, the DD54G,
the Linksys,
WRT54G, whatever it was.
Yep, the classic.
Yeah. The original router, right? Yes. The original G router, and like a modern, Netgear gamer router with speed fins and the whole thing is it's pretty substantial in terms of
sure.
Inside,
but I think you're still kind of overpaying for what you're getting inside one of those things, right?
Yeah. So the positive for me, I would say, is if you were someone who messed around with trying to install Tomato or DDWRT on one of those ancient black and purple routers, the experience of using something like pfSense today is so much better. It's hilarious. Like I spent so much time just cursing at those routers trying to make them good, and they were never good. I just couldn't do it.
So I did run. I in fact actually I still have the other. So I have 2 nodes. I have a node in the garage and I have a node in my office. So that we have Wi-Fi in like my daughter's room in the bathroom on the far edges of the house, and the one in the office still runs DDWRT. It got to such a point that I was afraid to run it as a router because I was afraid to upgrade it, because the upgrade process is so fraught on those projects that like if you mess something up, then your router is dead. So then the choice is keep a spare router or just get and this is why I switched to Google Home, frankly, for the main router and stuff in the house, is because I was tired of having to constantly futz with the thing that makes all the internet in the house work, and it was too high risk, to look, the 7-year-olds will go ham on you if they lose Netflix. So
it's a tough crowd.
I don't have to worry about that. But yeah, I wanted something a little bit more robust than I felt like the mesh networks would give me without spending enough money. Because I was like, okay, if I buy the high end mesh, that'll probably suit me. But I felt like the low end stuff was maybe going to be a little dicey once I add in the fact that like I run a home server with Plex. I like to be able to stream it remotely back when I used to go places outside my house. And so I wanted something that was going to be able to handle that. No problem.
Well, and there's something really nice about having access to all of the settings, right? This is something that Brad talks about. And I do feel a tiny bit of envy.
I see. The truth comes out, huh?
But I'm also relieved to not have to futz with the settings. I don't have to have my NUT server isn't connected to my router to turn it off in case of failures.
I seem to remember it's only been a couple of weeks since you had some choice words for people who insist on running the fancy routers.
So Okay, so where did you start? You had hardware, so you started with hardware and then looked at what you could put on that, I assume.
Yeah, so I didn't really look around a whole lot because I had heard of pfSense for so many years, and kind of just in my head that was like, this is what like hardcore Linux people use when they are really serious about networking. They run this. And so I kind of had it in my head that if I was going to upgrade to something that I built myself, that would be the route to go. And there are a couple other options. Like Brad, you were talking about, you are a little familiar with OpenSense, which is a fork of pfSense. And I don't really know what the difference in the two is, other than I know OpenSense has a totally different UI. Like they wanted to make some interface changes. I'm sure there's some other differences here and there, but they're obviously, because one's forked to the other, like there's a lot of core similarities there.
Yes. The gist I've gotten from just kind of reading message board comments is that like pfSense is it's more stable, but maybe a little more set in its ways, like it's kind of been around for a long time and it has a way of doing things. And that I've gotten the sense that OpenSense is a little more modern in both like UI and capability, but like by updating it more often, you get some of the problems that come along with that, in terms of maybe not stability, but, like certain functionality not being quite there yet and that sort of thing.
I don't know if what you get from being on the cutting edge of homebrew router software, probably some cool stuff if you know how to take advantage of it.
I was going to say, do you... like one of the things, so it's kind of like a managed install, kind of like a Raspbian or like a, something is this something you download an image and you put it on the hardware and then it detects the hardware and then you have a slick front end. And if you want to dig into the conf files, you can. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, it was actually the thing I would tell people who are kind of like on the fence about this idea is I am not an expert when it comes to networking stuff at all. So I found the idea of doing this intimidating, but once I actually looked at what the install process looked like, just like on the pfSense Netgate website, it looked really simple. And it actually was. It only took me maybe half an hour to get the whole thing up and running. You spend very little time on the command line. So when you first are just going, like you run that image, you do a couple steps on the command line, pretty much all you're typing in is like, do you want to proceed? Yes. Do you like want to, I think you have to bind like which network interface you want for your LAN and your WAN. And that's basically just typing in like number 0 through 4 or whatever. So you're just typing in a couple things and it kind of does everything for you. And then once you get through that initial setup process, you do everything through a web UI the same way you would manage like, any Netgate router that you just bought off the shelf.
And this has Wi-Fi too, right? I assume you could do a hardware only, like an Ethernet only router, or you could plug a Wi-Fi card. Did you just plug a normal Wi-Fi card in? Or is there something special you have to get? I just
built the Ethernet router because I already had a pretty decent Netgear router that, it wasn't cutting it for me for handling all the actual routing traffic, but it had pretty good Wi-Fi signal. So I figured, okay, I'll just take that thing, move it to a more central location in my house and just set it to access point mode. I don't know really what it's like running pfSense as your actual like a whole home Wi-Fi router, what kind of Wi-Fi card you would need to output proper signal. I'd be interested to see if people have good setups like that. But I didn't run into anything like that in researching it a little bit. And I figured it would be a lot easier to just go Ethernet and then use my router since I had it anyway.
And is pfSense built on a common Linux? Like, is it Ubuntu or Debian or something like that?
It's FreeBSD based, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is why, unfortunately, it won't work on the Raspberry Pi unless I think it is possible to like compile it yourself or something, or like you run FreeBSD on the Raspberry Pi and then it is possible, but like it's going to be a whole ordeal.
Yeah, this is going off on a tangent, but I have spent too much time installing FreeBSD on Raspberry Pis and finding that the support is poor to non-existent.
Well, but I mean, there's a really interesting, that means that there's a potentially interesting use case where you can install pfSense inside a jail on like a FreeNAS box and just put an extra network card in your FreeNAS box and turn your FreeNAS box into your router if you want to really live on the edge.
I thought about doing that, but like I wondered if that was doable, and I asked some people who said maybe you should put that separately somewhere else. Like having the router running on the thing that is also a client of the router is maybe crossing the streams a little too much.
Think of the speed,
Let's
Brad.
say.
I think it is possible, but yeah, it's kind of like how deep down the rabbit hole of one device running virtual systems to then run your entire home network do you want to go? And I didn't want to try it. That sounded too hard to me.
I guess I'm kind of skipping ahead here a little bit, but I'm curious how secure. So on a lot of one of the benefits of doing managed installs like this, where you just download the image and then go through the startup script, is that theoretically you can just hit an update button and the provider is vetting like package interactions and things like that. So you don't do the thing where you type package upgrade and you fuck up your dependencies and then you spend three days trying to figure out how you jacked up your router. And the managed install makes that a little bit more. If they manage that stuff for you, that makes it a lot more compelling for me.
Yeah, I mean, they have a download button like right on the dashboard for new versions of pfSense. And I actually haven't updated mine yet because I'm on like the stable 2.4.5 release, which came out, I don't know, 4 months ago or something. There is one update since then, but like I feel like I'm going to check out the patch notes here and there when they do updates, but I'm not going to click that update button unless I feel like there's some new feature I need or some security issue that I need to patch, because it seems like it just runs pretty damn well right now. So I'm not too worried about trying to stick with every update, you know?
I mean, I guess the question isn't, is it the most secure thing in the world? Is it more secure than the ASUS router that gets a firmware update every 2 years, whether it needs it or not? Right.
Right. Yeah. I think most of the security for these, I mean, of course, there's inevitably going to be little vulnerabilities here and there, but I think the big advantage pfSense has and OpenSense is how configurable they are for your firewall setting. You can make your firewall and your NAT and all that stuff as intense or not intense as you want it to be. And that's sort of like, that's the real learning curve, I think, is like, I've been playing some games and I'm like, I have strict NAT now, even though I have UPnP enabled. Like, how do I fix that? And how do you
make you want it promiscuous, man? Get it as promiscuous as you can for games.
Open ass NAT, exactly.
Yeah.
So I've had some issues there, but
what are the default settings like when you first get, like, you know, you finish the install, you end up at the web interface? Like, how is it set up initially? Because like I've got a Ubiquity Edge router, and the philosophy of that thing seems to be that it does absolutely nothing that you don't explicitly tell it to do, like up to and including. When you boot it out of the box, it does not have a DHCP server running. Like, you have to plug directly into it and manually configure an IP to even connect to it.
You have to configure routing tables on that thing even, don't you?
I think so. Once you enable DHCP manually and get access to it, there is a kind of setup wizard you can choose to run. But like I said, you have to manually do that. It will set up some of that stuff for you after you tell it to. But I'm wondering because this is a similarly like hardcore kind of situation, if it's also that bare bones out of the box, or if it's a little more kind of ready to go.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now. I didn't have to do anything crazy that was like, I would not know how to set up a routing table or what that would even look like. So I didn't really have to do that. I think it gives you pretty basic setup where you're like, you can plug in, you know, choose your DNS servers. That's kind of on like the general page. A lot of the stuff is already set up. You can choose what you want for your IP range. You know, like I set up on 10.0.0.1 because I didn't want it to conflict with the AT&T modem. And then I think I had to tell it to run a DHCP server, but like that was like a checkbox basically. I said, yes, do that. And then it kind of just started running on the IP range I set. So there's a lot more power user stuff you can get into, like setting up all your static IPs and, you know, configuring the firewall in a lot more detail. But by default, I feel like it works pretty well out of the box with like, I don't know, 20 minutes of setup or something.
Do you have normies using this, or is it just huge nerds like you?
My roommate is not I would not say he's a networking like power user. He would not try to do something like this by himself, but he was playing Project M, the Smash Bros mod, like Super Smash Brothers Melee mod over.
So huge nerd.
Netplay, yeah, different style of nerddom we're talking about here. But yeah, he was playing that over Netplay, and like the ports needed to be opened, and so I just basically sent him a link to like the port forwarding guide for pfSense, and he was able to do that in like 5 minutes. So
is that the mod that adds rollback? Or is that the one that got rollback recently?
It probably does. I mean, they like rebalance the whole game. You know, it's like if you wanted Melee to be a perfectly balanced fighting game, and they've been modifying it for 15 years now or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is me shaking my head.
Yes, I know. That's the right response. This is kind of a subjective question, but have you just like noticed day to day, just from using your internet, any real difference in like throughput or responsiveness or latency or
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so when I did this, I was having a lot of issues where the network would crash when we were downloading games, and even when it seemed like everything should just be fine, I was maybe getting like 600 megs, like top speed. Sometimes I was just getting like 300 for no discernible reason. And since I've installed this pfSense router, it's been rock solid. Speeds are more like 800 to 980 megs. So like I'm getting pretty much as the fiber can give me. And we've had one instance where our internet went down, and I think it was just AT&T going down because there was nothing I could see that was wrong on my end.
So I was going to say there are some other alternatives if you don't want to do the managed install that pfSense or OpenSense give you. There was that guide on HomeLab by a user whose name I didn't save, unfortunately, but we'll post a link in the show notes. It basically went through this whole process, building the whole router from scratch, including adding Wi-Fi 6 cards, or probably AC cards at the time, but I think it had an update that said you could do Wi-Fi 6 now, and showing how to do that using Ubuntu as Ubuntu, one of the LTS versions, and it seemed like it's interesting, but it seemed like it would be a really challenging thing to keep safe and secure. Like this is one of those places that for me, I kind of like having Google be the person, or at least AT&T be responsible for the thing that is shielding my internal network from the wilds of the outside world. It's nice to know that there's somebody who's smarter than me, presumably working on that.
Yeah, I like the fact that pfSense and by extension OpenSense are the core of that technology is made by like an enterprise routing company. Like this is their business. They sell the hardware and they make the software to go with it. So I figure not only is it going to be a lot easier to run than like building everything through Ubuntu, unless you know Ubuntu like the back of your hand, but it's probably going to be as secure, if not more secure, than your average home router is going to be.
Yeah, also by being built on top of FreeBSD, like that OS by virtue of being monolithic and also like 30 years old is known to be like pretty secure and like pretty hardened out of the box. So like you've got a lot of layers of protection there. This reminds me of Will a few episodes ago when you talked about having that unsecured Windows 2000 machine just plugged straight into the internet.
Oh God!
Like the thing, like you can tinker with all kinds of stuff behind your firewall. But the thing that is facing the public internet, like you don't want to get in there and mess around with that stuff too much. You want to let the professionals handle that.
Yeah, that is. Look, my ISP at the time with that Windows 2000 machine sent me a note that was like, "Hey, we're going to turn off your internet because you got like 17 worms on the public facing IP address." And I was like, "Oh." I mean, but this was in 2000. I don't think I had seen a consumer router. The first time I saw a consumer router was in probably 2001, 2002 when Linksys started rolling out those 802.11b, the blue and gray boxes. And that was up until that point my ISP said, "Hey, you can only have one computer on this connection. You just plug the computer straight into the modem." It's just
That's
good
how
science.
it works.
Yeah.
Well, since you mentioned Netgate and their hardware business, did you look into? I mean, I know you had hardware on hand that you were intending to use, but since you wrote an article, did you look into some of their embedded little boxes that they sell? And do you have any opinions on those?
Yeah, I looked at them a little bit, and it seemed like I was definitely trying to aim for like the higher end of the power scale just to be overkill, but it seemed like their hardware kind of ranged from one box that seemed maybe a little underpowered to me. They have one that's $180 that doesn't really seem like it's meant to be able to hit gigabit speeds. And then they have one that's $400 that's like a big step up and would be more like you could use it at home, but like kind of more like a small office piece of hardware. So I was like, I don't know that I feel like what I want is somewhere in between the two of those things, you know?
Yeah, it seems from the little bit I've looked at, it seems like to get the kind of performance you're talking about, you're getting up into quite a few hundreds of dollars to $1,000 or more. Yeah,
the thing that I think I haven't used it, but what I would probably recommend people to look at is a brand called Protectly. Protect LI, and they do something that looks quite a bit like the Netgate systems, but they're just little small form factor fanless systems. They do like a 2-port and a 4-port and then bigger ones, and they run on Celeron, dual core CPUs, and they start at like $200. And if you configure one with what seems like a pretty good configuration with like, a small SSD in there, like 4 gigs of RAM, it's going to come in at like $250 or so, which seems like a pretty reasonable amount to spend on.
I'm glad you brought these up, because before I got that Ubiquiti router, I was thinking about going the pfSense route a couple years ago, and I just pulled up Protectly, and I was looking at these exact boxes back then.
I think these are a pretty popular choice for pfSense.
So at least back then, you could find a bunch of these on like AliExpress. Coming out of like Shenzhen, I think, badged with some different brands on them. But they're these little fanless boxes where the whole thing is just a giant heatsink.
Yeah, and if you look on Amazon, you'll see a lot of similar systems that are in that $200, $300 range. Obviously, like Chinese computers, great value for what you're getting. The thing that I struggled with a lot of those looking at them was trying to identify what network card they had in them, and most of them just don't expressly say what the network card is. And because they're not like American companies with marketing budgets, when you go to their website, they do not have like good documentation that breaks any of that stuff down. So it's just really hard to figure that information out. And most people in the pfSense community anyway really recommend Intel cards over Broadcom or Realtek. Some of that is probably like it's just sort of community like mumbo jumbo, like people have been saying Intel is better for long enough that everyone thinks Intel is better.
Yes.
But I think there's some driver stuff there too for FreeBSD that is legit.
Yeah, a lot of these, the open source operating systems, just straight up hardware support is an actual concern for sure.
Yeah.
I was gonna say like when you're looking at these different, what's the power? Have you looked at the power consumption for this thing? Like it's got to be pretty hefty
for mine.
Yeah, running BSD, because like BSD's power management is not. It's not like BSD is turning CPU cores off when they're not getting used, right?
I've just decided to not care about it for a while.
That is one solution.
We'll see what the power bill looks like over time. But like when I look at the dashboard, my CPU usage on this thing, and this just shows you like how overkill it is. If I run like speed test and I'm hitting like almost full gigabit, it's at like 11%. That's the highest I've seen it go. Normally it's at like 5%, and it's running pretty cool. So I don't think it's using, considering it sits right next to my home server, which is also running 24/7. I feel like this one is probably a drop in the bucket in power usage compared to that, which is running Plex movies and stuff all the time. So
yeah, I can see that.
It's probably a few bucks,
Are you doing, I know when you get into like this kind of, there's a bunch of functionality you can add. Like you could run a VPN. Like theoretically, if you ever left the house again, you could have a VPN. It lets you VPN into the house, or set it up as an end node for your corporate VPN. So when you need to connect to the company VPN, you can do that as a house rather than as a client.
And doing that kind of stuff is where having the higher end CPU actually matters.
Yep.
So I don't have any of it set up yet, but I think eventually I'm going to try out the VPN stuff. And the VPN, it runs OpenVPN is what's built into pfSense. From what I've read, it can only do single core. So that's where having a faster CPU actually can be pretty significant. At least 2 to 3 gigahertz, I think, is what you want for the single core performance there. And that's where you also need more RAM. Now, when I say more RAM, like 4 gigs is probably plenty. Mine has 16 in it because I had 2 8 gig sticks, but I'm using 4% of the memory right now. If I ran OpenVPN and also one of the popular plugins for this is there's 2. There's one called Snort and one called Suricata, I think, and they're both like for packet sniffing, basically. So if I ran one of those, that would probably use a gig or 2 of RAM by itself. VPN would use like a gig. So that's where 4 gigs is like an actual like possible situation where you're hitting, as opposed to me right now. I'm using like 200 megabytes or something. I would
love to talk to you down the road about your VPN performance, provided we ever actually do get to leave the house again.
I'm excited to try that out.
Because I run a VPN on my router. And it's fantastic. It is super worth whatever effort you have to put into it, because being out in the world and just being able to connect to your home network and have access to 100% of the resources on your network from anywhere is worth its weight in gold, even though it has no weight because it's not a tangible thing. But the thing I was going to say is, like, you're right. Like, I've got gigabit up and down here. So theoretically, all other things being equal, I should be able to get like roughly 900 megabits from my house or whatever,
right?
Except that the encryption involved in VPN bottlenecks that's pretty severely, not terribly, but like my performance through my VPN tops out at something like 400 megabit through a 900 plus megabit upstream, because my router is not fast enough to crunch the encryption faster than that.
Still pretty good for a VPN.
It's fine. Like, I'm not complaining. Like, it's 400 megabit is totally fine. But
what if it could be better?
Right, exactly. Like, academically looking at that and going like, well, this is a pretty fast router, but I am kind of limiting my VPN speeds here. So like, I'm curious, with you being on like a real beefy CPU like that, like if you could hit much higher speeds than that through that encrypted tunnel, I wouldn't be surprised if you could.
Yeah, I would like to try that out. And I think another really important factor there is having a CPU that can do the AES-NI, the new instruction, which is, I think if you're getting any Intel CPU other than like some super low end embedded or something that's ancient, like you're gonna be fine.
It's like post Sandy Bridge or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Right? I had to look into that when I built the FreeNAS machine too, because there are encryption considerations there as well. And I want to say it's anything from the last, I'm throwing out a number here, like 5-6 years. I want to say at least.
Yeah, I mean, because mine is at least 4 years old. So, and I think it's well within the new era. So
definitely anything from like Skylake or newer, I would say, and probably even further back than that.
Yeah, so not something that you're probably going to run into unless you're trying to build or buy like a really cheap system, or if you're like, oh, I have a Core 2 Duo Dell in my closet from work 12 years ago. Like, let me turn that into a router. That might not cut it.
I was looking up to see which ones. It looks like it's even Haswell.
Okay,
like it's way back. It's like Westmere. Some Westmere processors,
what is
most
Westmere?
Sandy Bridge processors, Ivy Bridge, Haswell, Broadwell.
You just made that
everything
one up,
supports
right?
it. Which one?
Westmere? What is that?
Westmere.
Is that actually
Westmere? Westmere is Gulftown. So it's like post.
You mean formerly Nehalem C?
It's the Nehalem die shrink. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like also Arendelle. Also, big fans of those from way back in Frozen 1.
Yep, big upstairs.
Not so much Frozen 2, it turns out, but
These could all just be airplanes also. Intel names.
They ran out of rivers in Oregon, in Washington, didn't they? Isn't that what I feel like once that happened, they had to change the mountains and all bets were off, so.
And then they're just like, I don't know, just put a word in front of lake. Tiger Lake, sure.
I feel like we should do an episode about computer project names, code names, because I feel like so many of them are so boring.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, some of them are really boring, but some of them also have really fantastic backstories. And of course, the moment I say that, I can't think of a single one that has a good backstory. But yeah,
but it's always just like, let's name it after national parks or cities or like the most mundane features you can possibly think of.
One of the plugins I use on pfSense has like a perfectly nonsense name, which is a PF Blocker NG. I don't know what that. Maybe the NG stands for
the next generation, man.
It probably is. It's probably next generation. But that one is it's basically pfSense's equivalent of running a Pi-hole on your network.
Oh, okay.
It's a different form of blocking, but it's basically for pretty broad spectrum ad blocking, whitelist, blacklists. You can load in all kinds of pre-configured lists you want, customize your own, of course. And as much as like being in media and ad blocking makes me feel tremendous guilt.
Yes, I have similar hangups.
Also, like, you can barely fucking browse the internet anymore if you're not blocking at least some stuff. Like mobile sites are just impossible.
Hey, do you know about tonsil stones, Wes?
Oh no, let's just not.
I've seen some like fucked up legs with like the weird like sock marks on them, and just I don't want to see that, man.
I thought we declared this podcast a No-Tonsil-Stone Zone.
I mean, I did. That's why I put the pile in a few months ago. I got the tonsil stone ads 5 times in one day or something. I was like, no, I say no more.
I can't believe we're doing this again. How does pfSense handle plugin like discovery and also installation? Do they have some kind of like central repository where it's just kind of one click install, or do you have to go out and hunt stuff down?
It has a package manager where there might be ones that don't show up on this list that other people have made that aren't like in the official repository or whatever. But if you go to the package manager, there's like maybe 30 that you can just like scroll through, and you click install and it installs in like 2 minutes, and then it's just up and running. And it even has nice like widgets for your front dashboard if you want to put a widget in for whatever package you just plugged in. So yeah.
Are they vetting those? The ones that are official? I
feel like they must be, just because there aren't all that many of them.
Okay.
But I don't like you said, know what the process is.
They have built a business on this thing, so it is certainly in their interest to keep an eye on that stuff.
Yeah, there's so few of them. There's nothing in here that looks like sketchy, like I'm installing some weird pop-up blocker.
China owns your machine now, like mode.
I'll report back in a year if it turns out that China has actually been on my router the whole time.
Have you had any emergencies? Like, has anything gone wrong and you've had to like recover yet, or not? It's too soon to say.
Nothing so far. It's been totally solid. I don't think it's even been turned off yet. Like, I haven't had like a power surge or anything, because actually I realized I need to go into the motherboard and set it to turn on after after like a reboot or whatever, to turn itself back on, and
the power goes out. I
figured I will do that when it gets powered off for some reason, and it hasn't gotten powered off yet, and it's been a couple months, so eventually I'll do that.
It does seem compelling to have like bog standard hardware in there that if something goes wrong, you can just open the box and swap out the memory and be back up and running, and not like I literally have a spare router in the garage just in case shit goes bad.
Yeah, I do not know how to troubleshoot the hardware of a Netgear router. Like, I could take the plastic off and be like, well, it hasn't exploded, so I'm out of guesses, but like with
this one's full of roaches.
With a computer, I can open it up and test the RAM and that kind of thing.
Does pfSense automate like backing up all your settings to like one file? Like FreeNAS has that, where you can just dump your settings to
like a JSON file or XML file or something.
.tgz.
Yeah, I haven't actually looked, but it's got to have somewhere. It's got to have a backup. I hope. Yeah, I should probably look into that.
Should I ask? You've got on the show notes here your to-do list for this thing is PFATT bypass, some kind of true bridge node. Do you want to talk about?
So. Are you also on Uverse Fiber, Brad?
I am not. I am familiar with their kind of mandated hardware situation and how much people seem to dislike it.
I am.
Will
I'm on that.
So they have this weird thing where you can DMZ plus the devices behind your router, which theoretically is supposed to just like pass everything through, but it does have, some people just run into something where like on certain models it just is fucked up basically and doesn't work, and it's like, oh, I have gigabit, but when I DMZ plus on my modem I only get like 50 megabit or something. Thankfully I didn't run into that issue, but it does still have some limitations with like how many connections you can have passing through it in total that obviously would be less than something as powerful as the router I built. So somebody has developed a system to basically enable a true bridge with the AT&T modem, which, if I understand correctly, you're basically able to remove it from the chain in terms of it doing anything functional. But AT&T, they have a system set up to where like they need to be able to see that modem. They're not going to let you roll your own modem, so they're pinging it or something like that. So somebody set up a thing with pfSense where you can basically take that ping or whatever it is from AT&T and route it to the modem that you have connected to your box, but it's just like literally only that bit of data goes to the modem, and just the modem is just like, yeah, I'm still here, everything's good, and then your router actually does all the work.
So you just plug your modem in on the inside the network side of your existing modem / router into the inside part of your network. And well, that's really, because that's the problem. I like that is literally why I gave up. I was like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to run the AT&T router because it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, so I haven't really looked into this because it seemed a little bit daunting, but I think eventually I'm gonna try it out. Like next time something doesn't work right and I can't figure out what it is and I get pissed off, I'm just gonna be like, it's time to do this. Time to take it out of the equation and see if it fixes it.
So I was just gonna say, so somebody has come up with a similar method for the edge routers, like the one I have to bypass AT&T stuff, and like. To me, generally, that's one of the great things about running these open source type projects is that if something irritates you, it is a 100% certainty that it has already irritated some other people, some of whom are capable of actually doing something about it. So like if you're willing to put up with the, just the fiddliness of, implementing stuff like this, like you can circumvent all kinds of stuff that you couldn't with a consumer.
And I would say
solution.
Similarly to that, like, we've all been there where we've had something like a Linksys router that's not working right, and you're Googling the problem, and all you find is like the Linksys forums and like 500 other people screaming like, please help me about this one particular variant. You're like typing in a 7-letter string that identifies that one router, and you're like trying to troubleshoot this one specific device that sucks. With something like pfSense, because it's open source, if people have problems, they all are going to go to this one community, and so you don't have this like weird, just like spread out nexus of people having issues with specific router models. Like all the problems go to one place. It all goes to a subreddit or like a community of people whose lives are dealing with like network stuff, like they enjoy it. So I feel like the troubleshooting here is so much easier and better documented than it is with the consumer router, that weirdly, even though it's more complex technology, it's a lot easier to get.
Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of those baseline problems just no longer exist in those communities because it is an open thing that a lot of people have been banging on for so long that like a closed, like a black box ASUS or whatever. Like you can't look into that, you can't see what it's doing under there that's screwing up your multicast traffic or whatever problem it has. Whereas like with something like this, people have peered in there and they figured out a lot of that stuff a long time ago. So like coming into the project is already going to work a lot better even before you needed to do any troubleshooting.
How's the community? I mean, there's kind of like, there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of communities that starts with like, yeah, man, just ask your questions and we're cool. And then goes up to, here's a 5-page template of all of the things that have ever been connected to your network that you need to like submit before we're going to answer a question about, turning on DHCP. That's the question. Yeah. That's it. That's all I got.
I love the forum people who are like, if this question has ever been asked before, like, get the hell out. Like,
fuck you.
Any open source community.
Why didn't you find the thread from 7 years ago?
Yes. Yeah. Any one of those communities.
3 message boards ago.
They're all going to have their gray beards, and I don't know, man. I think you can rest assured that a lot of people there quietly have the same feeling you do about that stuff.
I ran into that a little bit when before we did the show. I was like trying to find some more specifics of people talking about the Intel versus Broadcom, and like found a classic flame war thread where one guy was like, Realtek is better than Intel, and then just everybody shitting on him for like posts and posts and posts.
So normal open source community then is what you're saying.
Normal open source community, but the Netgate site itself seems to have pretty good documentation for all the basic stuff you can do through the interface. And then I found the Reddit community like pretty decent in terms of having threads where people are actually recommending hardware and stuff. Thankfully, I haven't had to actually go out and like ask my own questions yet. So we'll see if I change my tune on that at some point.
I guess I think we've kind of hit all the high points. Like, I'm interested to hear what you do with this in the future, if anything other than just like leaving it as a normal router and a VPN. And I hate to say this. Oh, I do have one other thing. We talked about Raspberry Pis early on. You don't want to use a Raspberry Pi for a router because of the way they're wired up. Like the buses that connect the network port and because you need two Ethernet interfaces to do a router, the other one has to come across the USB bus, and it's going to gate you at 480 megabits because of the way it's hooked up.
So that is true right up to the 4, but they did finally overcome that limitation with the Raspberry Pi 4.
It supports 3.1.
My understanding is it has full gigabit throughput. That the NIC is no longer going through the USB bus on that thing.
But your second NIC is going to be going through the USB bus.
Yeah. So I mean, it finally has USB 3, so I guess that's better. But I don't know if a USB 3 Ethernet adapter could achieve the speeds you need there or not.
Like, I guess if you have like 100 megabit internet or something, and you're just looking for a little project, certainly a lot cheaper to buy a Raspberry Pi than to build an Intel.
Yeah, but
system.
like you said, I mean, they're also the Intel. I think we still haven't decided if it's NUC or Nuke. The NUC.
It's Nuke is how the Intel people always said it. Yeah, Nuke.
I still hear people saying Intel NUC, but
well, those people can pound sand.
I mean, you can get a decent one of those. Those are x86 based for like $100 and change. So. There are other options out there.
Wow. They get it inexpensive, and like the Gigabyte, there's a Gigabyte Celeron, like dual Celeron, like those Seed. My ad blocker just blocked the link that I clicked. But the Seed Odyssey boards, which are like x86 quad core. I guess what would have been a Celeron J4105s are like $200. With 2 network cards and a micro slot and all that stuff. Like there's hardware that is ready to go, basically. So
yeah, I think the next step for me, and like I'm really glad to have this device, partially because it's now separated entirely from my Wi-Fi experience, so I can have a really good router that should last a long time. Like I guess the next step would be if I need to go beyond gigabit. You
want to reduce power. Like my guess is you're going to look at the $20 a month it's going to cost to run this, and you're going to be like, I might spend $200 on a low power board. I don't know.
Yeah, but like I think even then I would basically keep the same PF setup. But then I'm looking forward to like, okay, once Wi-Fi 6 is well established, prices come down a little bit, then maybe I build my own mesh network with like some Unify access points or something. And when you're buying just access points instead of a bundled router, like they're pretty cheap. You know, you can get really good ones for $100 or something.
That is, to me, that is one of the best things about getting into slightly higher end networking gear is decoupling the Wi-Fi from the router / firewall. Feels so liberating.
Yeah.
I've got a pretty standard AC access point. Like A, Wi-Fi 6 is coming along. B, like after I bought the one I have, I kind of wished I had gotten like the slightly higher tier one with more antennas and blah, blah, blah. But point is, like you said, like once your router is in place, you just kind of forget it's over there. And then as Wi-Fi standards mature or you want more capabilities or whatever, you just buy more Wi-Fi stuff bolted onto the network instead of having to throw the whole kind of the baby out with the bathwater and start over.
Totally, yeah.
So, real quick, before I know we're about to wrap up, I've been resisting the urge to bring up some of the PFSense OpenSense drama. I don't know if did you come into contact with any of that stuff at all as you researched this?
I want you to dish right now.
I mean, there's a straight up press release here on the OpenSense website.
Press release drama?
Jesus Christ.
Apparently it ended up in court, apparently. I didn't realize it had gone that far.
Holy shit.
PFSense slanders OpenSense with fake domain and Nazi imagery.
Wow. Holy shit. I didn't expect to talk about Godwin's Law today.
Netgate / PFSense acts in bad faith. Something. Yeah, I haven't looked into this stuff too much, but when I thought about running one of those a while back, I apparently there was some very bad blood when OpenSense forked from pfSense.
I guess when you take your hobby seriously enough, at some point it just escalates to slander and Nazi symbols. I don't know.
Like there's some accusation of their domain being hijacked.
Wow.
Having a bunch of kind of FUD type material put on there for a bit.
I guess it's like the problem when you piss off like networking nerds is they know how to fuck up your internet presence.
Oh, wow. I just ended up on the vandalized page on the Wayback Machine. We have features, but that's not what's important. When we fork a stable enterprise-proven software project, we strip out most of the important functionality. I don't know.
Wow, so they were just offended that they forked it and changed the shit that they had bundled up in there?
They literally embedded the Hitler downfall meme video on here.
Jesus.
And made their own.
I don't know if embedding the downfall meme is... I mean, I guess there is Nazi imagery in the downfall meme, but that
like, might be the
reading that press release.
Or kind of stretching that a little bit.
Slightly different joke, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like different than like, hey, OpenSense, great routing. Also, we're Nazis, so hey, come join us. It's a different message there.
Looking into this a little bit right before we started, I ended up on the pfSense subreddit and found a post from a couple years ago entitled "Feature Request: Less Drama."
Oh, that sounds great.
Apparently, as contentious as open source projects can get, this one is really up there. It sounds like.
Thankfully, none of this has manifested in my router itself.
That's the thing. Yeah. Everything I've read makes it sound like both of those projects are perfectly fine and do exactly what they're supposed to.
Yeah, if you're interested in building one of these, I would say just look at like some screenshots of the two and go based on the UI that you like more, because unless you're a really heavy user who's going to get into the super technical capabilities of both of them and like determine the one thing that one of them does better, just go on the one that looks nicer to you and you'll be fine.
Can we before we let Wes go, can we have 5 minutes to talk about delidding CPUs?
Oh, I'd be delighted.
Well, I get Wes. Apparently, I didn't realize this until we had him on for this, but I guess he's the guy who actually follows through on all the computer projects that I am interested in and then back off of. But yeah, I've what has it been, like 2 years now that I've been talking about borrowing that bracket from you to.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, you can borrow this thing. You were gonna do it on the live stream maybe, and then just like not exactly a pressing, timely project, so it just kind of slid. I did it a couple years ago because I got it was a 7700K.
Yeah, that's what I have.
I'd read. It's seen people talking about like how shitty the thermal paste they put on them is, and how
cooling is terrible, man.
Yeah, and how hot they run. And so if you delit it and put on like some liquid metal shit, it's like 10 to 20 Celsius cooler operation, which is pretty massive. So I bought the Der Bauer delitter and ran it through, put my CPU through it, was scared shitless that I was going to destroy it. But it's a pretty easy process. Like you just be careful and put it back in. And
I was going to say so when we delitted stuff at Maximum PC years ago a few times, and it was always like the only reason it wasn't terrifying was because if we fucked it up, we would have just called Intel and they would have sent us a new CPU. Were
you using like a vice grip and like a hammer? How were you doing it?
We had a bench vice and a it almost looked like a ROM puller. Like it was a thing that you put up, and there's gaps on the edges where you could get up under there, and then you kind of heated it a little bit and just kind of popped it off. But the scary part, and I think the only place we ever had problems was on cinching the coolers back down.
Yeah,
because it was before they did. It was before they had the stops on the cinch on the screw downs. Now you kind of can't over tighten a CPU these days. I'm sure somebody can, but it's you have to really work at it.
Yeah.
And back then you could cinch it down and just you'd hear a bad sound, just a very, very faint bad sound. And then the parts that make your CPU smart are smushed in with the parts that do not make it smart anymore.
Was that sound the die cracking by any chance?
That was the sound of the dreams dying and
the die dying.
Yeah. It turns out it doesn't take much of a mush to mess up a die when you're talking about a really fragile piece of silicon.
Yeah.
that's fully exposed to the elements. There's a reason those heat spreaders are on there.
So yeah, what you just described is what made me back off of that. I was not worried about the delidding. Like that contraption that Wes has makes it look like it's fairly foolproof, right? It looks like it would be pretty hard to screw up.
It feels wrong. You're like, wait, so I just put this thing in, then I like turn a screw, and then it'll just pop it off, and it's
Yeah, and it just pops off. But it was the guesswork about, like Will said, putting it back in the board. And like the thing that really stopped me was the number of people that were like, don't bother gluing the heat spreader back down. Just put it on there loose. The clamp will hold it in place. It'll be fine.
That's what I did, and it's fine. It's fine so far.
I'm sure.
Oh, wait, you put the heat spreader back on?
Well, you have to.
You put it back on, but I didn't like glue it back or anything. It's just sitting on.
Yeah. So when we did it at Max PC, we just left the naked chip on and put the cooler on top of that because that's the way. When you used to delid, that's why you delid it. So you get that
looser back then.
Yeah,
that is maximum PC. Yeah,
it was buck wild back then.
It's a little bit safer these days, I guess. Both the delidding itself and the reinstallation. But like, I looked at people's advice, and basically all I did is you put it back in, and then you offset the heat spreader by like just like a centimeter or something upwards, so that when you tighten down the bracket, it'll kind of just pull it down a little bit.
Oh, like squinch it over.
It was that kind of guesswork is what actually put me off of doing it. And then at some point it was just like, you know what, this chip is not going to be viable forever. Like I'm going to get a new CPU sooner or later. Let's just not bother.
Well, I still have the thing lying around somewhere. We can do like a COVID safe like handoff. I'll like throw it up to your window or something.
No, you just slide it under his gate. It works great. We do it all the time.
That's right. Yeah.
I have a delidded Nehalem in the garage, I'm sure, in an old motherboard that was my daily driver for like 5 years probably when we started tested. So
that would make a fun picture if you took it apart, I bet.
I'll next time I clean the garage, I will definitely find that. Wes Fenlon, thank you so much for coming by and telling us about your stupid unnecessary project. We appreciate it.
Now you have to build an NAS.
Yeah, he has an NAS. Wes was a NAS thought leater. He had a NAS before I did.
So I have it's not a NAS running one of the managed software is Synology or something. It's just like a Ubuntu one I built. But I right now I've been for the past 4 months talking with a Chinese case company that has like a really compact 8-bay NAS case for a micro ATX board. And like I got in touch with them in March at the beginning of COVID fever setting in because I was like, I need to do a project. Like it's time to do a project. And they're like, yeah, we have this really cool case. We'll send you one. But like there are no shipments right now. And so I've been waiting for the boats to start coming back to bring one. And I might have it in 2 or 3 weeks. So I will let you guys know how that goes.
You look at I'm starting to think about Proxmox and Unraid because I'm feeling the urge to move off of FreeNAS sooner rather than later, which is almost certainly going to be a boondoggle.
FreeNAS is getting pretty good again, but I get it.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of stuff running in jails. It'd be so much easier if I just run it in Ubuntu and like set up some Ubuntu VMs. And anyway, Wes, what are you working on these days? This is the section where we plug things.
Not much other than watching a lot of 80s anime movies in my spare time, playing the new hot samurai game Sekiro from a year ago.
The other new hot samurai game.
Yeah, love that.
And at PC Gamer, I'm just doing cool stories, editing stuff for people and trying to write good articles now and then.
Work from home life treating you well. I guess I would imagine you guys, you as an outfit were probably tech savvy enough to adapt pretty quickly.
I was actually work from home before that. So really it's only been like a mental adjustment. It was like, I used to work from home and then I would go out in the evenings and go do something to get out of the house. And now I have another computer set up in my dining room. That's like my office. And I basically use that one during the day. And then I turn it off at 5:30 and then I come in here and I use the other computer. And that's my life.
That's the
Sounds
life.
good, man. Are you just Wes Fenlon on Twitter?
Wesley Fenlon, yeah.
Wesley Fenlon on Twitter. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming by, Wes. This has been awesome. We'll have to have you back sometime.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'll build some more cool shit so I can sneak back on.
Definitely. Now is the time where we thank the patrons As always, this podcast is supported by your patronage, and we appreciate it. Every single person who's backing the show or just sharing the show with their friends. But as this is the last normal episode of the month, it is time for the executive and associate producer shout outs. So thank you so much to David Allen, Kurt Brownridge, Andrew Cotton, and Jacob Chappell, our executive producer level patrons, and our associate producer level patrons, Graham Banks, Thomas Shea, Sam Buck, Jad Rita, Dan Brockman, Dave Ulian, The Bunny Fiend, Arthur Geese, and CJ Rebita. Thank you all so much.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't do it without you.
Yeah. The Discord wanted to open an investment channel today.
Whoa, yikes.
And I was like, this is a bad idea, because what's going to happen here is people are going to give advice and then somebody's going to lose up. Like, if you guys want to just hate each other a lot after the end of like 6 weeks, let's just start a Neptune's Pride channel and we'll get a big Neptune's Pride game going, and everybody will be so angry at the end of like 6 weeks that the whole thing will just shut down. So we dodged that bullet, I think.
Okay.
But,
I was going to say we might have to start addressing our own liability in this situation.
Look, there are a bunch of good ideas in there, but there's an occasional bad one. So
Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod are not responsible for any financial losses you may occur.
Yeah, we are not we're not brokers. We're not financial. This is not an investment. All the other, I'm going to go find a Merrill Lynch ad and copy and paste the copy from the end of that and just put it at the end of the podcast as a full disclaimer.
Just do a find replace. It'll be fine.
It's a lovely, the level of conversation continues to astound me in there. I know we say this almost every week, but it is wonderful. The projects that people are sharing, people are posting desk pictures constantly, which I no longer feel great shame for my situation. I pulled half of the computers under my desk's cables up into cable racks now.
Nice.
So I can vacuum under 30% of the desk. And then the other one, I think I'm just never going to do, because it seems like it seems like it will cause more problems for me the next time I need to move or unplug something.
Oh my God, dude. If you want to,
if you can divide the number of computers under your desk in half, are we talking 4 or more computers?
3, but only 2 so I have a 2 PC stream set up, and I can do 2 VR players at the same time in the same space. So I've made some choices that aren't great.
And I thought I had a lot of computers in my house.
Well, it's only that in the FreeNAS box right now, and there's a couple of Raspberry Pis doing some stuff. But
that's it. That's
it's
respectable. That's about what I've got going on. Maybe we should do a full-on desk setup episode at some point.
I'm down for that, because I think people got real excited about the nano suction tape stuff that we talked about last week.
Yeah. But I was going to say real quick, your concerns are not unfounded about tidying.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to figure it out. There's got to be a name a la Moore's Law, some kind of law for there's like an inverse relationship between how tidy and compact and hidden all your shit is and how accessible it is when you need to do something with it.
Yep.
I am at the point where if I want to unplug an HDMI cable from my splitter, I need to move a piano across the room.
Oh no.
Pull the desk out about 3 feet, crawl under there on my back, slowly sit up, wind my arm around behind the cable rack, and very gently pull one of those cables.
So I don't think I've ever heard of this before. I'm going to suggest that we call this the Shoemaker Treatise.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I feel like there was a moment back when I was at Maximum PC where I was like, I'm going to put all the cables that come from my computer up the table leg, and I'm going to Velcro them to it. And then I was like, Velcro is a pain in the ass. It gets all dusty and gross. I'm just going to zip tie it on. And I got them all zip tied up there. I ran them all up. It was one incredibly fat cable snake. It was like 3 inches around, and it looked awesome. It was really cool. The next day, my HDMI cable died because I cinched it down too hard with the zip tie, and I had to break the whole fucking thing apart. And I just left it, and it's there. It was tied there 2 weeks ago when I redid my desk, still from 10 years ago. So
this explains so much. This is like your messy desk supervillain origin story.
Here we are. Anyway, that's it for us this week. We will have a patron exclusive episode between now and the end of the month, hopefully, if everything goes well, or if not, it'll be the start of next month. We appreciate you all, and thanks again, Wes, for coming by. It's been great to talk to you again, man.
I appreciate you guys.
Hey, thanks, man. Bye, everybody. See you next week.